I never imagined that a simple evening walk could turn into my worst nightmare. My 10-year-old daughter, Emma, was just trying to enjoy a peaceful stroll near our home when everything changed. The neighborhood's homeowners association, HOA, had always been strict, but I never thought they would go this far. That evening, 2 HOA security officers stopped Emma on the sidewalk. She was confused, scared, and alone, but they didn't care. According to them, she was violating the HOA bylaws just by walking home. Hours passed, and Emma never made it back. At first, I told myself she was probably at a friend's house. Maybe she had lost track of time. But as the minutes stretched into hours, my anxiety turned into panic. I called her friends, her teachers, anyone who might know where she was. No one had seen her. Then my phone rang. The number was unknown. A cold, emotionless voice spoke. "Your daughter is no longer in this neighborhood. She was removed per HOA bylaws." My blood ran cold. My knees nearly gave out. "What do you mean removed? Where is my daughter?" I screamed into the phone. But there was only silence before the call disconnected. Tears blurred my vision as I tried to comprehend what had just happened. No explanation, no location, just the horrifying reality that my little girl had been taken. Frantic, I called the police, but even they seemed hesitant to act against the HOA. "We'll look into it," they said, but I knew that meant nothing. These HOA officials operated like they were above the law, enforcing their own twisted rules. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I got an anonymous tip. Someone whispered the words that shattered me. They left her 400 miles away. I couldn't breathe. My baby, alone, lost, abandoned in a strange place by the very people who were supposed to protect this community. Without a second thought, I jumped into my car and sped off into the night. I didn't know what condition I'd find Emma in. I didn't know if she was safe. But one thing was certain, the HOA had made a terrible mistake. Because they had no idea who they were messing with. The drive felt endless. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Was Emma scared? Was she hurt? Had someone taken advantage of the fact that she was alone? My heart pounded in my chest as I thought of my little girl wandering the streets, cold and afraid. I kept replaying the phone call in my head. How could the HOA justify something so monstrous? Removing a child from her own neighborhood. What kind of rule allowed that? I didn't care about their so-called bylaws. All I cared about was getting my daughter back. After hours of driving, exhaustion weighed down on me, but the adrenaline kept me going. I was getting closer to the location I had been given, an unfamiliar town with nothing but endless roads and dim streetlights. My phone's GPS guided me through the unfamiliar streets, but every second felt like an eternity. Then I saw her. Emma sat on a bench at a gas station, hugging her knees to her chest. Her once bright eyes were dull with exhaustion and fear. Her pink jacket was dirty, and her blonde hair was a tangled mess. My heart shattered at the sight. I slammed the brakes, jumped out of the car, and ran to her. "Emma!" My voice cracked with emotion. She lifted her head, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Mom." I wrapped my arms around her, holding her so tightly I could feel her rapid heartbeat. She broke into sobs, clinging to me as if she was afraid I would disappear. "I thought you wouldn't find me," she whispered between sobs. Tears streamed down my face. "I will always find you," I promised. Always. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything was going to be okay. But as I looked around, a wave of anger surged through me. Someone had abandoned my child here like she was nothing. They had driven her 400 miles away and left her alone, vulnerable, in a place where anything could have happened to her. Emma shivered in my arms, and I quickly helped her into the car, turning up the heat. "Did anyone hurt you?" I asked gently, trying to control the fury in my voice. She shook her head but looked down. "They put me in a car. I kept asking where we were going, but they wouldn't answer. When we got here, they just told me to get out." Her voice trembled. "I begged them not to leave me, but they drove away." Hearing those words nearly broke me. I gritted my teeth, gripping the steering wheel as we drove away from that place. The rage inside me burned like wildfire. This wasn't just an injustice, it was a crime. The HOA had crossed a line that no one should ever cross. As I glanced at Emma through the rearview mirror, she looked so small, so fragile. I reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "We're going home," I said firmly. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't over. The HOA had made a grave mistake. They thought they could get away with this, that I was just another powerless resident who would accept their authority. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just any mother. I was the district attorney, and I was about to bring hell down upon them. The drive home was tense. Emma sat curled up in the back seat, gripping her stuffed rabbit like it was the only thing holding her together. Every few minutes, I glanced at her through the rearview mirror, watching her tired eyes struggle to stay open. My heart clenched at the thought of how terrified she must have been. I wanted to shower her with comforting words, tell her that the worst was over, but I knew it wasn't true. The worst was yet to come for the HOA. The moment I pulled into our driveway, I carried Emma inside. I could feel how exhausted she was just by the way her small body leaned against me. She was asleep before I even tucked her into bed. I sat beside her for a long time, running my fingers through her hair, whispering promises that I would never let anything like this happen again. Once I was certain she was deep asleep, I stepped out of her room and closed the door softly behind me. The gentle hum of the house was the only sound, but inside my mind, there was a storm brewing. My hands shook with anger as I walked downstairs and pulled out my laptop. It was time to fight back. I began with the security footage. Before leaving to find Emma, I had demanded that my neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, send me her camera recordings. Her home security system was one of the best in the neighborhood, and her cameras had a direct view of our front yard. I clicked on the file, my fingers tightening into fists as I watched. 2 HOA officers, dressed in their dark uniforms, approached my house. Emma had just stepped out onto the porch, probably on her way to walk to her friend's house. The officers spoke to her, and I watched as my daughter hesitated, clearly confused. Then one of them grabbed her by the arm. My breath hitched. Emma tried to pull away, but the other officer whispered something to her, and she froze. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. What had they said to make her stop struggling? Then, they led her down the sidewalk and forced her into the back of a black SUV. I could just barely make out the HOA logo on the side of the vehicle. The moment the doors closed, the car pulled away. They had taken her, kidnapped her. I felt a cold fury settle over me. I had suspected it before, but now I had proof. This wasn't some minor HOA dispute. They had committed a serious crime. I pulled out my phone and called my closest ally in the district. Attorney's office, Mark Reynolds. He picked up on the second ring. "Rachel." His voice was groggy, like I had woken him up. I didn't care. "Mark, I need you to listen carefully," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My daughter was kidnapped and abandoned 400 miles away by my HOA. There was a beat of silence before he responded.
"What?
Are you serious? I have video evidence." My voice was sharp. 2 HOA officers took her from my home, forced her into a vehicle, and dumped her in another town. This is beyond an abuse of power. It's criminal. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "Where's Emma now?" "She's home. She's safe," I said, though the words felt hollow. Safe wasn't a word I would use until the people responsible were behind bars. Mark exhaled.
Okay.
"Send me the footage. I'll have a judge review it and issue warrants by morning. Do you know the names of the officers involved?" "I will," I said darkly. "By the time I'm done, I'll know everything about them." After hanging up, I wasted no time. I dug into the HOA's records, pulling up employee rosters, reviewing recent board meetings, and cross-referencing any mention of disciplinary actions against residents. The deeper I looked, the worse it got. My neighborhood HOA wasn't just overstepping their bounds. They were operating like a dictatorship. Residents had been fined for minor infractions, properties had been seized over technicalities, and families had been harassed into leaving their homes. And now they had escalated to kidnapping. I scrolled through the employee files and finally found them. David Harper and Chris Yates. Two men with a history of aggressive enforcement. There had been multiple complaints against them. Unlawful towing, property trespassing, and even allegations of intimidation. But the HOA had covered for them, claiming they were just strictly enforcing community rules. Not anymore. I saved everything I found and sent it to Mark. Then, I drafted an official complaint to the police, outlining the crimes committed against Emma. I attached the video footage, making sure there was no room for doubt. By the time I was finished, the sun was beginning to rise. Exhaustion tugged at me, but I refused to sleep.
Not yet.
Not until I saw justice. At 8 a.m., my phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen.
They're going down, he said.
We got the warrants. Local law enforcement is moving in as we speak. Those HOA officers are about to have the worst day of their lives. A smile, cold and satisfied, spread across my face.
Good.
This wasn't just about Emma anymore. This was about every family that had been bullied, threatened, and wronged by the power-hungry HOA. It was time to put an end to their reign. And I was going to make sure they never hurt anyone again. The moment I ended the call with Mark, I felt a shift in the air. This was it. The war had begun, and I was ready for battle. I turned to look at Emma, who was still fast asleep upstairs. Her breathing was steady, peaceful, unaware of the storm that was about to hit our neighborhood. As much as I wanted to stay by her side, I had a job to do. I needed to make sure the people who did this to her paid the price. I grabbed my car keys and left the house. My first stop was the police station. As soon as I walked in, I spotted the officer in charge of the investigation, Lieutenant Grayson. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with sharp eyes that had clearly seen more than their fair share of injustice. He gave me a firm nod as I approached. "Miss Carter, we're already moving on your case," he said. "We have officers on the way to pick up David Harper and Chris Yates. Once they're in custody, we'll question them and proceed with formal charges." "That's good," I said, but my voice was tight. "But I want more than just those two." They weren't acting alone. Someone in the HOA authorized this. Someone gave them the green light to take my daughter. Grayson exhaled, rubbing his chin. "We're looking into it, but without a direct order or a paper trail, it's going to be tough to pin this on the higher-ups." I clenched my fists. "Then I'll find the proof myself." He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "Just be careful. These people clearly don't have limits." That was an understatement. I left the station and headed straight to the HOA office. It was a beige, unimpressive building at the heart of our community, but inside, it housed some of the most corrupt individuals I had ever encountered. As I walked in, the receptionist, a thin, nervous-looking woman, jumped slightly at the sight of me. "Ms. Carter," she stammered. The board isn't available right now." "That's fine," I said smoothly. "I'm not here for them. I need access to recent enforcement orders." Her face paled. I don't think I can." I leaned in. "Do you know what aiding and abetting a felony means?" I asked in a low, controlled voice. "Because right now, the people you work for are under criminal investigation for kidnapping a child. If you don't help me, you might end up on that list too." Her eyes widened in horror. She hesitated, then quickly turned to her computer, typing furiously. There's a log of all enforcement actions," she whispered. "But only the HOA president has full access." That was all I needed to hear. I turned and stormed down the hallway toward the president's office. I didn't bother knocking, I kicked the door open. Inside, Thomas Whitaker, the HOA president, nearly jumped out of his chair. He was an older man in his 60s, with a bald head and a permanent scowl. His eyes narrowed as he saw me. "Miss Carter, what the hell do you think you're?" I threw a folder onto his desk. "That's security footage of your officers kidnapping my daughter." His face twitched. "That's a very serious accusation." "Don't play dumb, Thomas," I snapped. "I know you're the one who authorized it. I just need proof. And you're going to give it to me."
He scoffed.
"You think you can barge in here and make demands?" I pulled out my phone and hit record. "You're already under investigation. The police are arresting your men as we speak. So you have two choices. Either you cooperate and tell me who else was involved, or I make sure you go down with them. His expression faltered for the first time. David and Chris didn't act alone. I continued. Someone gave them the order. And since they're not smart enough to come up with this on their own, that means it came from you. He shifted uncomfortably. I never meant for it to go that far. So you admit it? I pushed. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. I told them to scare her, to teach you a lesson. But I didn't tell them to take her so far away. I felt white-hot rage course through me. You ordered men to take a child from her home. You don't get to decide how far is too far. His face paled. What do you want? I smiled coldly. Your resignation. Effective immediately. And a signed statement admitting your role in this. His mouth opened in protest, but then he saw the fire in my eyes. He exhaled sharply and reached for a pen. Fine, he muttered. I watched as he wrote down a full confession, signing his name at the bottom. I snatched the paper and took a picture of it, immediately sending it to Mark. Then I turned back to Whitaker. Now get the hell out of my neighborhood. He swallowed hard and nodded. By the time I left the office, my phone was buzzing. Mark's voice was filled with satisfaction. We've got them all. Harper and Yates are in custody, and with Whitaker's confession, we can charge him too. I exhaled, finally feeling the weight on my chest begin to lift. Good. I drove home, feeling a sense of justice settle over me. But as I pulled into the driveway, I knew this wasn't over. The HOA was finished, but I still had work to do. I had to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. And I would stop at nothing to protect my daughter. The moment I stepped through my front door, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The house was eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I found myself pausing, taking a deep breath before proceeding. Emma was upstairs, still resting, and I didn't want to wake her just yet. I set my bag down and sank onto the couch, my hands trembling slightly. I had fought battles before, but this was different. This was my home, my daughter, my life. And yet, the fight wasn't over. A notification buzzed on my phone. I glanced at the screen. It was Mark. We've got him in custody. Whitaker tried to talk his way out, but with a signed confession, there's no escape. I'll update you after the hearing. Relief flooded my chest, but it was short-lived. Because as much as Whitaker's arrest was a victory, I knew the rot within the HOA ran deeper than just one man. I leaned back, my mind racing. The Homeowners Association wasn't just a few bad apples. It was an entire system built on unchecked power, hidden behind bureaucratic red tape. Whitaker may have been the face of it, but there were others. People who had turned a blind eye, who had enabled this corruption. And I wasn't going to let them slip away so easily. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't just going to take down Whitaker. I was going to dismantle the HOA, gathering the troops. The next morning, I woke up early. Emma was feeling better, though still shaken, and I made her breakfast before heading out. Today was about strategy. I needed allies. My first stop was Mrs. Delgado's house. She was one of the longest-standing members of the community and had been vocal about her dissatisfaction with the HOA for years. When she opened the door and saw me, she didn't even hesitate. "Come in," she said. I stepped inside, and before I could say anything, she shook her head. "I heard what happened. That poor girl, those monsters." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I need your help." She folded her arms. "What do you have in mind?" I laid it all out. The arrests, the confession, the corruption that went far beyond Whitaker. Her eyes sharpened as I spoke, nodding along. When I was done, she was silent for a moment before she finally said, "You're right. The HOA has been a disease in this neighborhood for years. We need to cut it out before it grows back." She picked up her phone. "I know some people who will want to hear this." That was the first victory. Over the next few hours, I met with more homeowners, people who had been fined unfairly, bullied, and harassed by the HOA's strict rules. People who had lost money, lost peace of mind, even lost homes because of their corruption. The more I spoke to them, the more I realized just how deep the wounds went. By the end of the day, I had a full-blown movement on my hands. The board meeting showdown. That night, the HOA had scheduled an emergency board meeting. They had no idea I was coming. I arrived with a small army. Mrs. Delgado, the families who had been harassed, even a few former board members who had been pushed out by Whitaker's reign. As we walked into the meeting hall, the remaining HOA board members looked stunned. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others whispered amongst themselves. I walked straight to the front. This meeting is about to change. A heavy silence filled the room. One of the board members, a man named Richard Holloway, cleared his throat. Ms. Carter, this is an official HOA meeting. You can't just. I cut him off. I can. And I will. Because everything about this association is built on lies, intimidation, and greed. And it ends tonight. I turned to the crowd behind me. How many of you have been fined for ridiculous reasons? Almost every hand shot up. How many of you have been threatened with foreclosure? More hands. How many of you have been harassed for simply living your lives? A sea of raised arms. I let the silence sit for a moment before turning back to the board. This is the reality you created. Holloway shifted in his seat. Whitaker is gone. He's the one who made those decisions. I narrowed my eyes. And you enabled them. You let him have that power. You stayed silent while your neighbor suffered. He had no response. I took a deep breath. Effective immediately, we are calling for a full community vote. The people here will decide whether this HOA remains or gets dismantled completely. A murmur ran through the crowd. A few board members protested, but they were drowned out by the rising voices of the homeowners. They wanted change, and they were going to get it. The final vote. For the next week, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with activity. The homeowners association had been untouchable for years, but now the people had a say. Flyers went up. Meetings were held. People who had never been involved before were suddenly stepping forward, eager to reclaim their community. And then, the day of the vote arrived. The turnout was massive. Families, elderly residents, even renters who had suffered under the HOA's rules came forward to make their voices heard. When the final tally was announced, the result was clear. By an overwhelming majority, the HOA was officially dissolved. A cheer erupted through the crowd. People hugged, laughed. Some even cried. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was free. As I stood there, watching it all unfold, I felt something inside me finally settle. We had won. Emma ran up to me, wrapping her arms around my waist. Mom, does this mean we're safe now? I kissed the top of her head. Yes, sweetheart. We're finally safe. But as I looked around, I knew this wasn't just about us. This was about every homeowner who had ever been bullied, every family who had been threatened, every person who had been forced to bend to the will of a corrupt system. This was a victory for all of them. And as long as I had a say, no one in this neighborhood would ever feel powerless again. The neighborhood had changed overnight. The once oppressive atmosphere of fear and resentment had transformed into one of celebration and unity. People who had barely spoken to their neighbors before were now standing together, chatting, laughing, and even making plans for the future. But as I stood there, watching the joy spread across the community, I knew our fight wasn't completely over. Yes, the HOA was dissolved. Yes, Whitaker was behind bars. But the remnants of his corruption still lingered, like the last traces of a storm that had wreaked havoc for years. There were financial records to go through, illegal fines to reverse, and most importantly, a new system to put in place, one that actually worked for the people, not against them. I took a deep breath and let myself enjoy the moment. Emma clung to my side, beaming up at me. We really did it, didn't we? She asked, her voice filled with disbelief. I smiled and kissed the top of her head. We did. And no one will ever be able to take our home away from us again. But just as I allowed myself to relax, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. Don't celebrate just yet. The mood shifted instantly. I turned to see Richard Holloway standing near the front steps of the community center. He still wore his usual smug expression, though it was tinged with exhaustion and bitterness. The crowd quieted as he stepped forward. You think dissolving the HOA fixes everything? It doesn't. Without us, who's going to maintain property values? Who's going to enforce rules? Do you people really think you can live without structure? Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some people looked uncertain. I walked toward him, standing just a few feet away. You mean the same structure that allowed people like Whitaker to abuse their power? The same structure that let you all ruin lives just to keep a perfect little facade. Holloway scoffed. Whitaker was one bad apple. I shook my head.
No.
He was the product of a system designed to control and intimidate, and you were part of it. He crossed his arms. And what's your plan then? Let everyone do whatever they want? Let this place turn into chaos? I turned to the crowd. Does anyone here want chaos? A unified no rang out. I faced Holloway again. We're going to run this neighborhood as a community, not a dictatorship. If there are real concerns, things that actually matter, we'll handle them together. We don't need a board that preys on people just to keep power. Holloway's face reddened. You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. I smirked. Funny. That's exactly what Whitaker said before he was arrested. The crowd burst into laughter. Holloway fumed, but knew he had no power left. With a final glare, he turned and walked away. And just like that, the last of the old regime was gone, rebuilding the community. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood went through its biggest transformation yet. With the HOA gone, we had to restructure everything from the ground up. We started by forming a neighborhood council, a group of volunteers who would oversee basic community issues without enforcing ridiculous rules. Their job wasn't to control people, but to help when needed. Fines were officially eliminated. Instead of punishing homeowners for harmless things like mailbox colors or lawn decorations, we worked together to find real solutions for real issues. And most importantly, we went through the HOA's financial records. What we found was shocking. Whitaker had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from the community fund. Money that was supposed to go toward maintenance, improvements, and repairs had instead lined his pockets and those of his close allies. With the help of a local lawyer, we filed a lawsuit against his estate, demanding the stolen funds be returned to the neighborhood. It would take time, but we weren't going to let him get away with it. As the weeks went on, we saw something incredible happen. People started to feel free. No more secret fines. No more intimidation. No more living in fear of losing their homes over a petty rule violation. Instead, families thrived. Kids played outside without worrying about approved activities. Homeowners painted their houses however they wanted. People decorated for the holidays without fear of being penalized. For the first time in years, it felt like a real community. A new beginning. One afternoon, as I was watering the flowers in our front yard, Emma came skipping over with a flyer in her hand.
Mom.
Look what Mrs. Delgado made. I took the flyer from her and smiled. It was an announcement for the first ever neighborhood festival. A celebration of our freedom from the HOA's tyranny. Live music, food stands, games for kids. It was everything our neighborhood had never been allowed to have before. I laughed. This is perfect. Emma grinned. I'm gonna help decorate. As she ran off, I took a deep breath and looked around. For the first time since moving here, this place felt like home. We had fought against an oppressive system. We had stood up to corruption. We had won. And now we were free. The final lesson. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat on the porch, sipping my tea. Emma was playing with the other kids, their laughter echoing down the street. A familiar car pulled up. It was Mark. He stepped out and leaned against the railing. You did it, Carter. I smirked. We did it. He chuckled. You know, I've been working cases like this for years. HOA corruption, property fraud, extortion. But I've never seen a community take down an entire system like this before. I shrugged. They underestimated us. Mark nodded. So what now? You thinking of running for mayor next? I laughed. Absolutely not. I think I've had enough politics for a lifetime. He smiled. Well, if you ever change your mind, you've got my support. As he turned to leave, I called out, Mark?
He stopped.
Thanks. For everything. He gave me a small salute before driving off. As I sat back, watching the stars appear one by one in the sky, I realized something. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about Emma, or Whitaker, or the HOA. This was about standing up for what's right, even when the odds are against you. This was about fighting for your home, your family, and your freedom. And most importantly, this was about never letting anyone take that away from you again. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long, long time, everything was finally at peace.